Hello, we're back in for episode 3. I want to start by apologizing for I typed it in the last one, but in case you didn't read about that, I'm really sorry for the very lengthy foot video that you seem to have gotten. I didn't realize I wasn't wearing socks or shoes last time, so it's just barefoot all in the video. And
well, how monk-like.
Yeah. Nice. You know what, though? If you're into the foot video, you didn't pay for that shit, so it was free. So I've socked on today. I know that I do this a lot. Anyway, it's fine. I'm not worried about it. But yeah, I wanted to help y'all out with none of that to this time. What's your name today?
That's a good question. I think Zarathustra has...
We're carrying over, right? Because we're kind of...
It may have expired by this point.
Okay, it may have expired. What are we going then?
I mean, I'm kind of with Zarathustra about a certain kind of God that's dead. I want to stop there. I mean, that's like just living a funeral.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I don't want to bring to life something which is deadening. And I know deadening because I've sat through hour and 45-minute long so-called high masses, which were anything but high. I have felt Gregorian chants really remind me of the eternity of hell.
My wife really thinks it's that it's hell when I'm doing it in the morning in the shower, because I don't know how to do the chanting. I'm just making weird noises, but I feel like it's the same thing. It feels transcendent to me.
I don't know. Father Raphael at 5:30 in the morning, he at least was able to drink a whole bunch of really powerful altar wine. I had to kneel on marble wearing a dress of all things as he would start this Gregorian chant of saints. And you think, saint this and that, and you start fading off. Good. Last saint. And then we also have Jesus Christ, you have too many saints. And I'm going to give you some more. I want to kill some people. Just wipe them out. You like martyrs. So the next person has to suffer through this whole Gregorian chant. I've clearly got some altar boy issues. You know what my biggest issue about the altar boy thing is that I had to learn Latin without the meaning, right? Just memorize shit. And I did with much pain. And every time I asked what it meant, they said, shut up. God hates you, basically, in different forms. And as soon as I learned this fucking Latin, sanctus my ass, they shifted to English.
Yeah.
And
that was a benefit of me being younger than you.
That's right. You didn't live through that.
Yeah, no. My altar boy days, the only thing I had, as you grow up and you hear about all these stories of priests doing inappropriate things with altar boys, like, I was never chosen, and it made me feel less than, not cute, not, you know what I mean? Like, you look at it in the other way, which is probably a horrible joke, but like, it's still, it's kind of like when I worked with a cannibal. I hugged him. He didn't even take a lick. You know what I mean? And I felt like, well, shit, I thought I was tasty. Just a little bit of tasty. Right. Yeah, just a sniff even, like something. But no. It kind of hurt. Feel a little bit of rejection. When you go through this, and rejection's not fun. So when I look back at the altar boy days, the only thing I really remember were the number of times. It did happen a few times, where at the end where the priest he cleans the chalice out with the water, right? He'll put more water in, he'll swirls it around, and he wipes it. Every once in a while, the priest that I was an altar boy for would go and like more wine. It was like,
did that every time. That big crude. He'd make
I would hand him. I was
little
set it down and hand him the wine, and he'd be like,
And see, I do like two or three masses back to back with old Raphael, and by the third mass, Raphael was lit, and it meant the Gregorian chants got longer. And then, and of course, we drank.
Did they get longer, or did they just extend the vowels as drunk
I
people
think that
tend
was
to
in the
do?
room.
Yeah.
Oh God. And he clearly was drinking so much he had no time to molest anybody, for heaven's sakes, except
Safe.
this kind of molesting me by listening to Gregorian chants, which never fucking end.
No.
I learned how to dissociate, which is nice. And just because a mass is so predictable, I'd only come online every now and then. And then my body did the calisthenics.
Yeah, no, because that was,
Had that down.
You just said the chant never ends. My brain instantly, I can't remember what it's from. Oh my God. There's a song that you teach children. This is the song that never ends. Yes, it goes on and on, my friend. Something like that. I don't know. If you know it, then you can tell me what it is. But I that reminded me of that. What if that and Gregorian, like that was talking about Gregorian chant? That was just a definition.
They would probably
musical
do that too. I don't put anything past them.
Now, the people out there, A, realize you still don't have a name. B, realize, okay, wait, what does this mean? Where are you all at? What are we talking about today? You've already started in these weird sexual themes and all of this other stuff, which is, we said that's an element of creativity last time.
It's going to happen.
We're there. And so it's creative. Chanting is creative. It, for some people, is transcendent or transformative. For some people, it's noise. Or maybe it's whether or not they're open. Which, see, you didn't even see, you may not have seen this segue coming in. What we're going to talk about today is we're extending, maybe focusing, creativity. And we're talking about, I'm going to let him name himself and identify the 4 ways of knowing. But we're going to talk about creativity in the essence of knowing, or being able to understand and fully appreciate something. So, without further ado, I'll give you the 4 ways. He's going to define them. We have. Do you want to do it in time? First, name yourself on the spot.
On the spot. Borrow somebody else's name. Set a plant for later on.
Yeah, you could do Carl, because you did mention Carl the first time.
I'm going to do Carl right now, because then I have to be quiet. Because
Carl is a quiet person. They are. You know what? That is an interesting thing. All the Carls I know are kind of quiet people.
Kind of quiet.
Even if they're extroverted, they're kind of quiet.
Kind of quiet.
We're looking at you,
It's
Carl.
kind of a vibrant, receptive quiet.
Yeah.
Quiet.
But they're okay.
I know.
So, all right. So,
pull that on. I'll just take the name of the one who visited me when I was a child. Azrael.
There you
Look
go.
that one up. That's a plant for later. I may talk about.
Yeah. The angel.
Oz.
Okay. So I'll say one of the ways of knowing. You give everybody your quick shot definition.
Jesus.
Okay. Whatever that means. I don't know. I just made that term up. So quick shot definition. Just run with that. So the first one would be induction.
Induction is a method of assignment of truth value to a statement.
That's easy.
By means of working from particular instances to the inference of a general rule.
Okay. Deduction.
Deduction is to another method of assigning truth value to statements. Only in this case, you begin with an assumption of a truth, known as a major premise. You apply it to a specific instance, known as a minor premise. And then, if you've done this right, what follows from that is necessarily true, is deduced. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Next, reduction.
Now, that's one I'm not as familiar with.
It's so to me, right? It's going to be very similar to deduction,
Right.
but it's going to be more of the scientific method. So you're taking something and you're whittling it down to a basic
Whittling it
truth.
down. That's what that's I was going to say. It's a method of assigning truth value to statements using a distillation to the essential features of whatever premise you're using, assuming that it's true.
Yeah, and I might be wrong between the two. I won't be the first time that I'm wrong, and I'm perfectly comfortable admitting that I'm wrong sometimes. Sometimes. But deduction is a process by which we're trying to create a new jumping board.
Yeah.
You're going to take something and you're pulling some stuff away in order to jump. Reduction is I'm taking this and I'm shrinking it to something of its essence. The goal there isn't to jump forward
No.
or jump again. It's to reduce. It's just to say this is a product of this, a product of this, a product of this, a product of that. And so those are the different premises. Now, those are the three ways that we know of knowing things most of the time.
That are systematic.
Right. So there's this other one. And the other one is talked about a whole lot less, unless you're into like science fiction or things like that. And sometimes you hear the word. But again, we don't give it the full appreciation that we have, that we should for social interaction, which is abduction. What would be your definition of
Boy, that's a hard one.
abduction?
Even you looking it up, see, the difficulty of defining it. It's often defined as that feeling of knowing. It's a non-systematic apprehension of a truth. The eureka moment. It does not contain with it, as you would get with deduction, the pathway to that truth. It's just the conclusion. And what this is the way my mind works, at least, is I abduct first. And then to check it, I use deduction and induction. And I think that's what you see. I don't think I'm really abnormal in that.
Sometimes I wish we had a fucking whiteboard, so I could write. Now I'm now writing like 6 different tabs of paper. It feels like, but I've got a point. You finish your point, and because I think there's a reason why you do that. That's just my thought.
Well, we spoke earlier about my conversation with an analytic philosopher, a PhD in philosophy, who expressed to me that in that branch of philosophy, really very Anglo-American, very mathematical, in that branch of philosophy, if not the totality of it, they know that abduction is where most of the big leaps in understanding come from, but they have yet to discover a systematic to outline how that happens. It almost seems to necessitate an avoidance of that more mathematicalized process. I think this is an example of it. Neurotransmission, the very process, that electrochemical. I had a moment late at night where I had to know what the first named neurotransmitter was. This was just not too many years ago. So I start Googling, and I find out it's acetylcholine. Well, I'm the one associated with memory and all that. But I'm like, how did they discover this? Well, it turned out the guy that discovered it, they were trying to figure out, is it electrical, is it chemical, all that. Just didn't know. But he had a dream. And not of neurotransmission, but of frog hearts interconnected. Squirt, zzz, squirt, zzz, wakes up and goes, that's how acetylcholine works. And all the neurotransmitters. That to me is an example of abduction. And it may be all that coming to terms with stuff in a dream while you're doing something different is good examples of abduction.
So, a couple things. One, a point for all of you. I hope you can see, in an effort to be somewhat transparent, we really don't plan or coordinate what our talks are going to be about. We have ideas, and then we just spitball off of each other, kind of see where it's going to go. That is to say that we don't do some homework or whatever. We don't look up a few things like, ooh, I want to make that point. But I've had several points that I wanted to raise that I forgot about when we get here and we start talking about other things. And so it kind of meanders and goes the way it wants. So I always want you to know that we are kind of more just free swinging here. It's not as organized as, and I don't think either one of us would ever be as organized to do all of that, right? Like there's a method to madness, but that's about it. Now, on to the what you said about abduction. So I agree. There's probably not a way to systematically identify how one goes about this. But, and I think you gave just in your discussion or your point about acetylcholine and having this moment. I think a lot of times really bright people fail to acknowledge the work that they're doing day in and day out. So, and that kind of goes back to that Buddhist principle of building a garden from which things can bloom. So you're putting all of this effort and understanding, which is all of the other three ways, right? We're incorporating all of those three ways to build a garden where abduction can bloom. And so that doesn't mean it's going to, because it may not, because you might, I think there's another step of it. You have to kind of be open, right, and vulnerable to take a next step.
Yeah.
And if you're closed off and you're narrow, which is we all know that scientists often are very narrow and they're not open to the possibilities of other. But you always have been. And so when you have this great bedwork and garden and rich soil of what you know through induction, reduction, and deduction, you now have the best place for abduction to grow and just take hold of you if you're open to seeing it. And so when you say, I start with abduction, I think you're in that statement negating all of the other work that you've done. Because in the moment, you're only thinking about the one idea, but you're not thinking about all the work that made that one idea come up.
It.
So then when you have an abduction moment, then as a good scientist, you go back and verify it, right? It has to be, we have to replicate this idea, or we have to double check to make sure that that's something of value. And I think probably all scientists have a little bit of abduction, even if they don't identify that that's abduction, right? Like that's the next, I remember I was talking to a former, I'm sure he's an MD, PhD now, but he was a grad student when I met him. And he was working on a project and they were looking at the cardiovascular system. And, he was checking to make sure that this heart operated like this, right? However, XYZ that they were supposed to do. And all of a sudden, out of the number of scientists that have been looking at the heart function the exact same way that he is, he sees something to the peripheral. Wait, what's that? And he starts looking at it. And he goes, that's weird. And then he notices it does it every time. It's not supposed to happen. Nobody's ever identified this thing happening, right? So he's being abducted by the potential of what is this? It's a consistent pattern that no one's talked about yet. And I think that's what we talk, in science and research, we talk about filling in the gap. Well, that's that abductive moment that you saw what someone else didn't see, and it may be big, it may be small, but it is that very exciting eureka moment. That led to him having a Nature paper and a science paper. And because what he found was this whole other possibility. And what was wonderful is he had a mentor who said, no, that was your work. That's not mine. And I want you to take it because it was your eureka moment. And it became his thing. So, and I know a lot of people are thinking, well, what does that have to do with creativity? And so I'll do my best to tie it down and then we'll move forward. The more creative we are, the more gardening we're doing, the more effort we're putting into that thing that is us, which allows abduction to happen. I don't know, is that fair?
That's fair. I really like that gardening metaphor too, because it feels like that.
If you're doing it right.
Like there's...
Your knees hurt, you're dirty.
And I've tried to explain it to someone when I've come up with some of those ideas. And well, how did you do that in this instant? Well, it came to me in this instant, but there was a whole bunch of stuff leading up to this, bits and pieces. And part of this was, I still go back to when I was at OU, airdropping a non-PhD in rhetoric into a philosophy department is just asking for war. And I knew it kinda. I didn't realize that this is a war that was 2,500 years old. And so I'm being dropped into this circumstance. And then I start making these outrageous claims. I made the most outrageous claim I could make to 2 PhD students, which was that philosophy was a subset of rhetoric. Which and that the chair heard me.
And they fought you like philosophy fight.
Oh, yeah, the chair heard me. This was funny as hell. Because I thought we were done. He was gone. They were asking me to explain rhetoric. And the chair was spying on me. And so I say this, and I hear, yell, Gabe, did you just say that philosophy was a subset of rhetoric? And I look, and he was roostering his hair. He was beet red. And I knew right away, oh, fuck. This is like going into a nice Christian church and shitting on the altar while you're laughing.
And saying the body of Christ.
Yeah. Take and eat. Have fun with this one. And I'm like, oh, fuck. And he made me explain it, which was this elaborate diagram. Now, the 2 PhD students are like, oh, this is going to be fun. They just actually stood back and took notes. 2 hours. I covered a board on the most elaborate goddamn diagram I've ever seen. And at the end of it, through clenched teeth, he goes, Gabe, I am reluctant to concede that based upon how you have defined rhetoric and how you've defined analytic philosophy, it follows logically that rhetoric or philosophy. For him to say this. And then after that, he said, you are one of the most ruthless and relentless logicians I've ever met. He was chair of department philosophy. I'm like, what? He said, you don't seem like it. But he said, what you do is jump steps. I'm like, what? He said, I just made you go through a whole bunch of steps. He said, but you don't make these leaps. That's abduction in some ways. And I said, well, I'm many times aware of the steps. He said, well, why don't you lay them out? I said, isn't it rude? He laughed. So you're being polite. I said, well, yeah. That stuff's obvious to me. And he said, well, it's not obvious to the rest of us.
But I think that's what people do when they see it, because it's when you go by a garden, drive down the house, or you drive down the street, you see somebody with a nice, beautiful garden, right? All you see is the blooms. You don't see all the work.
You don't see all that.
You don't see all the effort and all the things that went into it. You just see the end result. And so if you have the wherewithal and the vision, and you're open to seeing the possibilities, then you know where to go. It's kind of like, oh goodness, what is it? It's there's a comic book character, I think. I don't know. Anyway, he's a teleporter, and he has to see where he's going to get there. So he can't just jump and get where he wants to go, but he has to know what it would be, and then he can jump to it. And it's that kind of moment of like, oh, I know where I want to go, and I'm going to be abducted and go where I need to be. Then you have to figure out how you got there. And so the person who's doing the jump may fully know, may know bits and pieces, but be able to fill in the gaps on the fly like you did with the board. Be able to, okay, no, I don't know how I got to, yeah, that makes sense, and I get there, right? And so you go through the process, but it's the jump to tell you what to work for.
Yes.
What to see. And you know that based on the other work you've done. And sometimes and I've always said this, some of the best people at a field are people who are very trained and experts in their own fields looking at a new field.
To me, I've always been fascinated with that.
Because they're creative enough to make a jump that other people are too conservative to make. Oh no, we have to do this before we do this. We have to do that before we do that. Well, wait, but what if we just do that? Then it's like Good Will Hunting, right? When Matt Damon's character makes several jumps in understanding, and then no one else does, and these are all brightest of the bright people. But it's not that he's smarter than, it's that he's differently oriented.
Yeah.
And he's open to different things. So I think that has a lot to do with creativity, is this openness to take a jump and try something. It's just like if we go back to poetry, right? All of these books are poetry. They're not all sonnets, though. Right? They're not all iambic pentameter books. God bless it, because that would be horrible to have so many of that. There are all kinds of poetry, but initially it was somebody to say, no, I can do this and still be poetry. I can do this and still be a thing. And it's no different in science.
I think that reminds me of Sister Faith, who I just fell deeply, madly in love with, this ancient nun, who was a highly respected poet, right, and a PhD in English. But with her, I was producing so much poetry, and I was taking this creative writing class, so she's exposing us to, the sonnet, the villanelle, the various forms, sestina, and I'm really, and the iamb, the trochee, the spondic, and I'm building poems, really attending to scansion and meter and all that, and she's just giving me positive feedback on it, and that I don't like it. I know something is wrong with this approach. I find myself breaking shit on purpose that'll have perfect meter, but that's wrong. Or I have a perfect rhyme and I'll fuck it up. And I ask her at one point, sister, why am I doing this? She goes, because you need to. I said, sister, am I going to write poetry like this? She goes, absolutely not. No. Well, then why am I doing this? And she laughed. She said something could apply to a lot of fields. She said, at some point, you have to learn the basics, play the scales. And she said, you don't have to start with that. She just get in there and make music. She said, if you're serious about it, you realize I need to know that stuff. That hard work stuff. Just like a friend of mine who was a potter, and he was living kind of in my house along with 50,000 other people at one point. But I came back to the house one day expecting to see him all covered with clay. And he was, but he's reading a graduate chemistry book. And I'm like, why? He's having to study the nature of glazes. Hates it, doesn't want to do it. Wished he would have done it before. But now he's got to become a pretty good chemist, trying to get this done. And I think this is Sister Faith is telling me. The nature of poetry is abductive, Kaag. It's not deductive. It's not inductive. You don't build a fucking poem. And in fact, like when this one poet said, what is poetry? It's words against which you have no fucking defense. And that includes the poet more than anyone else. Mm-hmm. I surrender. I am Muslim to these fucking words. It's that kind of thing. But you need those basics. And I still use it.
Because you need to know when you break them, and you break them intentionally. This is a part of what I'm trying to create.
When I'm creating a poem, I turn all that off when I revise.
Yep.
I'll be, something doesn't feel right. Well, what is it? Oh, let's look at it. As often as not, I become too regularized rather than I need to violate. I become too sing-songy. I'm not going to let go of some of my alliteration or something. Jesus.
And people also think that they're supposed to just zero draft things somehow, right? And I love Walter Mosley's quote. Because Mosley's a great writer. He's a lot of fun. He also didn't start writing until he was in his 40s. Very late to the game. But somehow in 30 years, well, hell, he's dropped 30 or 40 books. You know, just once he got there, he got there. But he said, there's no such thing as writing. There's pre-writing and rewriting. That's all there is. And then at some point, you just stop rewriting.
That's it.
It's like, this is good enough.
This is good enough.
I can't make it better. It's ready for other people.
Yeah.
And you know, you probably, as you get practice, the number of rewritings shrink, but not always. I think the project is what determines it. Like, if you really have a feel for the project, yeah, that might be true, and it might shrink, and you might only have 2 or 3 rewrites.
My mentor, very different than me, because he'd been writing for years. That he would perfect sentences and put them down. And he got this invitational piece, big thing. You know, the heavies in composition is to write a chapter. So he writes his chapter, sends it off, and they want him to do revisions. And he goes, Gabe, can I have help? I'm like, you need help from me. And I knew he was in this process. He said, they're asking me for revisions. I said, well, you've always taught about this, Gabe. I haven't had to revise anything for 20 years. And I'm like,
how to do that.
I said, I always revise things. Give me your thing. And it was funny as hell, because he had done those revisions in his own head.
Yeah.
He knew what not to do.
And sometimes I do that when I'm writing. I'll swear that the sentence reads perfectly, but then when someone else reads, it's like, you're missing 3 words. This doesn't make sense. And I'm like,
the closure comes
damn sure it does make sense. It's a perfect sentence. Like, no, it's not. And then they're like, see right here, this word. And I'm like, oh. But it was there. It's like it disappeared. But it was only because it was here. I never put it there.
I used to,
I read it.
First started teaching writing, I was my best writers. They'd leave the verb out. Have a beautiful sentence. And so I started bringing them in. Read me that sentence. You know, the one-on-one. And they'd put the verb in or whatever it was. And I'd say, read it again, word by word. And then they did the same thing every time. They'd get to that missing and they'd blush. They'd say, I know better than the verb. I said, training in psych. I'd never read this in psych, but I'd studied perception. I said, I think this is a form of closure. Mm-hmm. I said, just like having 2 thes and you only see one.
Right.
And I said, I'm only seeing this amongst the best writers.
Because your brain's working a little bit faster.
Working in huge chunks of meaning, not at the sentence level. It's the words are just on there for a ride. That's my sense. That when I'm really engaged in something, I'm not that conscious of the words. I'm conscious of the ideas, the images, and all that.
Which is how you said, like you read, I think you said that last time. Your first read is love. It's passion.
Yeah.
It's intense. It's eros.
Feel me.
Yes. I want to fall in love with the sentences. Next read, I'm going to be critical.
I'm going to be critical.
Next read, I'm going to come for you because I believe in it, and I want it to be the best it can be, and I want everybody else to see it. I had a student just the other day. She brought me her paper. Her paper was really good. She brought it to me. She goes, well, you took off for formatting. I was like, yeah. She goes, can you look at it? And I was like, sure. So I said, okay, see, that's not the way it's supposed to be. That's not the way it's supposed to be. That's why. And she kind of looked at me and gave me the side eye roll. And I was like, listen, I know I'm being very picky. And I said, that's the best compliment I can give you because it means everything else is good. And I know it feels like I'm narrowing in on you, but that's because you're ready to be a better version of this writer. Whereas some of the other students can't put 2 sentences together. Okay, I can't be this picky with them because it will break them. I'm trying to build them up to be a more confident writer. You have confidence already. You already do the thing really well. But now how can you do it a little bit better? And I said, that's all it is. I'm not trying to be mean-spirited or hyper picky. But if you give me space to be that picky, then you've done great work. Trust that.
Yeah.
You're upset because you don't have a perfect score. Not that I took off I took off 2 or 3 points because it wasn't perfect. And like, oh my gosh, it's like three extra spaces or something.
And I've had them, you're holding me to a higher standard. Yeah, I am. That's a compliment. But it's not fair. Well, no. Not if you're looking at just the average thing. I'm teaching you.
Not if you're looking at the flat world comparisons, but if you're looking at, I'm trying to help every one of my students become the best that they can be, it's extremely fair. Because it would be wrong for me to hold a student who doesn't have your background, your support, your training to the level that you can reach. Just like it wouldn't be fair to you if I say, because you're further along than that, you don't need to work at all.
Yeah.
No one's improving in that regard. So yeah, that's actually the fairest way I can teach.
Yeah.
Because it's looking at you as an individual, not a composite, not a comparative. I'm looking at you for you. And I want to help you on your path. It's a compliment.
Even happened with a good friend of mine. Nepotism with me works the opposite way, right? He was living with me on the res and decides to take intro to psych from me. And he's living with me. Gets to talk to me every day and all that shit. So he's got that extra. And I'm hard as shit on him. And he's like, we're old friends. Sort of my old friend. You son of a bitch, you're being a short on me. I said, yes. Well, it's not fair. I said, I don't give a fuck. I'll kick your goddamn ass. Why are you doing this? I said, you live with me. You get to ask this question. You got the teacher in the fucking house.
Right.
And I said, more importantly, you're smart enough. I said, of course I'm going to do this for you. I said, if you thought, you know me, if you thought you were going to take a class from Gabe and I was going to be nice, I am not nice.
No, I have students who, it's not my job to be nice. I'm a kind person. I'll say it this way. I would like to believe I'm a kind person, right? But nice is a front.
Yeah.
Nice is inauthentic typically. I've rarely found nice people to be truly authentic. It's a facade. Kindness is nice, but as the Buddhist teachers used to do, they would take a big cane and whack you with it when you were step out of line. You weren't doing it. That was an act of kindness. It was an act to get you back where you're supposed to be, so that you can grow and continue your path. It wasn't mean. And so sometimes holding people, when my kids, somebody asked my kids, like, well, would you take your dad as a professor? And my daughter knew the right answer. My son was just like, And she goes, no. And they're like, why? She goes, he would be horrible to me. I was like, I don't think I'd be horrible to you, but no, I'm going to hold you to a standard that the rest of them will never see. 100%. And that's not favoritism. It's, I expect more out of you. I know you better than I know them.
That's right.
I know what I can get out of you. I'm meeting them for the first time. The natural inclination is like, I know who you are. And I think that's the real reason they don't let faculty teach their children. I know some faculty people, might just give their kids an easy A, but I think most serious academics would really be hard on their kids.
Yeah, I think so.
And I'm going to hold you to the standard because I see you every day. I know what you can do.
What you're capable of. Yeah. And now I'm in that role. I'm parent and teacher. And so, damn, I'm going to be that parent. I'm going to be that teacher that.
And I think those are the best teachers. I know. I think teachers can do that. I think teachers have this amazing ability. I had an English teacher, Miss Carey. And this is an abductive moment. It was just kind of precious. I remember it was just a bunch of chance serendipity. Now everybody's gonna say it's fated or whatever. There were so many outs that I could have taken, so I don't know that it was guided by higher divinity. But then again, what is divinity other than what we make it? So maybe it was. Anyway, I'm in an airport in Texas, and it's the year that they have that big tornado that came right just like 12 years ago. And I look up and we're waiting. Our flight's delayed. We landed in Texas from New Mexico. We're trying to get back. And I look up and I see my high school English teacher sitting there. And I was like, oh my God, Miss Carey. And she looked at me. She goes, yes. And I was like, well, you look almost exactly the same. I said, I probably don't. I said, Stephen. And she was like, oh my God. She goes, you know what? I have thought about you. And she goes, this is amazing. And she was taking a flight somewhere, right? So it just so happens that both of us Oklahomans are in Texas airport at the same exact time. So I was like, yeah. And she goes, what are you doing now? And so I kind of gave her the rundown. And she goes, are you still writing? And I go, no. I said, I said, kind of. It's more of like the scientific type of writing, research, things like that, but not really creatively, in the full creative capacity. And she goes, really? She goes, that breaks my heart. And I was like, why? And she goes, well, you don't know this, but I just retired. And when I was cleaning out my desk, I still have a folder of all of your stuff.
Oh, God.
She goes, all the things you wrote for me. I remember writing poetry and things like that for her class. And she goes, I kept it. She goes, I didn't keep all my students' work. I would have had too much. She goes, but I kept yours. She goes, I wish you'd have stuck with it. As it turns out, it was 6 months later I started getting a second bachelor's degree in creative writing. And I just finished a master's in it because I was open to being like, I do miss that. Yeah. I do. And sometimes we get that nudge from someone, right? To go back to what we do. And then you start doing it. So then I took a course and I thought, well, I'll never write a novel. I always wanted to write a novel, right? That was kind of a dream. But I never thought I would. Because long fiction.
Yeah, I know.
Damn. You know, you've written at least the one, right? And so, which he has, and it's brilliant. And he's supposed to, you can all hold him accountable. He's supposed to be revising it because I want to push him into publishing it. It's a great book.
Jesus.
Great opportunity. And so, for you to work on. But, so I always wanted to write a novel, but I never thought I would have the consistency or the conviction. I mean, it's all the self-doubt shit. Well, I can't do that. I can't do this.
Strong.
And then all of a sudden, I had a thought. A little bitty voice that abducted me. Pretty soon, she grew into a face. She grew into a voice. And she grew into all these other things. And it became, I want to tell her story. I want to tell what happened to her. I want to tell why it's important. And so it became more and more and more. And all of a sudden, I'm enrolling in writing the novel, and my entire master's thesis is creating an original work of fiction that is novel length. And that's what I just defended. So it's all of the groundwork. Had I not written, I'm gardening when I'm in high school writing that poetry. That's gardening. All of those little creative efforts are gardening for what we're going to be blooming later. If we don't lose faith in it, lose hope in it.
Boy, that's critical.
If we're not jaded and disingenuous, but if we do it passionately. But I think I read this, it was an Ethan Hawke quote this morning on Instagram. And he said, you know what's weird? We're raised as little people with a bunch of teachers who beautifully, passionately, lovingly tell us to chase our dreams. And then along the way, we become teenagers and everybody tells us to lay up, play it safe, go get a good job, that'll pay well, to do this. And we're taught to disassociate from all of those things that meant so much for so long, all the medicine. And then we end up on all kinds of medication and we're all fragile and frail and anti-anxiety, antidepressants, and anti-everything. Maybe we've lost touch with all those little, we mentioned that right before we started filming, that Peter Pan moment. Because as you said, great works all happen. I always love this argument from my grandmother when she would say, oh, you'll understand when you get older. I'll understand what? To give up? To be callous? Because that's what older people do. Every great invention has happened, prior to the age of 25. And then you spend the rest of your time. All of that abduction happens here when we're younger and our minds are open and free. The people who do it, and you mentioned Feynman, right? He maintained this boyish wonder up into his whole life. And Carl Sagan would be another one who, Neil deGrasse Tyson would be an example of somebody who has this,
and maybe it's
this childishness.
And maybe too, the form in which we're working. You know, if we go to to the poem, it's usually short, quick, that burst, perfect for youth. If we go to the novel, that was the hardest thing for me, was that discipline. That is a big fucking discipline in front of you. That was tough. And I found out reading about other novelists that they all hit that. Mm-hmm. There's a wall in there. And many people start novels, very few finish.
Yeah.
That was it. But when I was studying, when do people do their best work? The novelists in their 40s and 50s. They still had enough energy, but they had maturity.
Enough wonder still.
And then I kept at, who does their best work old? What medium? And it was there. It's one of my favorites. It's the medium I would work in, but I can't. Sculptors. And I remember Fritz Felton, this remarkable sculptor in my hometown. Better known in Europe than here. But me and friends would go get stoned and sit in our cars and watch him work on a piece. And he loved that we do that. And we go talk to him. And I watched him for 2 years work on the same piece. How do you do this? And his response was, how could I not do this? And he said, yes, it is releasing that form. And he said, in the beginning, it was more like just chipping away stuff so I get the right. And his early works were all highly classical. He was wealthy, came out of, Michelangelo kind of shit. But his own style was rough. Undone, not that smoothness. He left the little chips in it. And
but he knew how to do that to not do it.
Exactly. And his theme had become those pioneers out west. And the Wild West. He's got one of my favorite statues of his is downtown Hayes, and it's a Wild Bill Hickok. And he doesn't get away. Wild Bill Hickok was as much outlaw as sheriff, and he's got him with his leg up against the wall, and he's rolling a damn cigarette. But for me to watch, how do you do that? As a teenager, when a year is 2 decades, how is it that when I was a different person, you started this project, and now I've become somebody completely different, and you're only halfway done?
Mm-hmm.
And yet what he exuded was this joy in it. He didn't really care if you liked his shit. That was gravy. He didn't fucking... And the community, he was the first hippie in the 1950s. He's driving an old Willys Jeep, got long hair, 5,000 cats, before the hippies. And the whole town, these Germans, what the fuck's wrong with him? He's got all this money. Why isn't he?
He's the person hippies were trying to be.
Exactly.
The genuine article, the beatnik, before beatniks were popular, before Jack Kerouac did his work, right? And then that's the thing. You see the genuine thing. Like, no. You're the template of what someone else is going to try to emulate.
You try to emulate.
And emulation is a great thing, but it only goes so far, because your work isn't to find out who you are. Your work is trying to be that person. But that's not who you are. They're doing that. That's kind of what we were talking about. Albert Ellis is doing all the Albert Ellis thing you need to do.
That's
you don't need to Albert Ellis. Do you? And that was a conversation before we started, but I'm going to write Albert Ellis down. It's worth a look up. Another great psychologist. There's so many. So one of these days, though, we're gonna have a nice talk. I don't want to. I'll name drop him, but we're not talking about him today. I don't think. I'm not. I'll say that. William James, and one of the things.
Oh my God, I've been thinking about him a whole bunch.
There was a Yale professor who just wrote a book on why William James is still important, and it is beautiful. I wish people would go and read it, because it shows you how important it is. And what I hate is when we talk about psychology and everyone wants to talk about Freud, which I get, and is necessary, and it's important, and it's a good thing, and everybody wants to talk about Jung, I also get, and I think it's extraordinarily, maybe even more important than Freud. But what people don't understand is our own greatest psychologist was William James, and he was their contemporary. He was just slightly behind them in age. He's there though. And we don't talk about William James. I hear him more in biology than I do in psychology.
Well, and here's the thing, he was a philosophy professor. Primarily, there was no psych. Those first professors made it up as they went.
Right.
And he wrote one of the first, if not the first, widely used general psych book ever. The two, the Jimmy and the James, both of which I've read. And saw, you pull out your general psych book and you pull out his, they look a hell of a lot like. He is defining the field, very important, and yet poo-pooed. Too philosophic, not scientific enough, and nobody reads him. I say that maybe there's some shame because he was brave enough to look at his own psyche, his own sadness, his depression,
and he did a lot of self-exploration, self-research.
Very much so. That is part of psychology.
But he's doing that whole, and the thing is neither Jung or Freud really do this. To me, every time I read, the biggest knock I'll have on them, with however many problems they have, is it seems to be they keep everything at arm's length. It's not super personal.
They keep themselves that way. They take the Red Book.
Which is a very medical thing, right? That's a medical thing.
The Red Book was Jung's self-analysis, his own self-exploration. Amazing piece, just looking at it. Yet he didn't want anybody ever to read that.
Right. There's only 4 copies, all locked away in Swiss banks, and
yet his students were like, maybe let a few glance at. Will you all please share with us you rather than your theory, your weakness.
And the black books to kind of get there, but again, he didn't want those read as much either. And so I think, and that's one of the things that really bothers me about both of them, is whereas you get to like Fromm, who's the most accessible. I think if I were going to force, like, if we were going to water everybody's voices down in psychology and you had to pick, this would be interesting. I'm going to pick 2 voices in psychology that I think are the only ones that we should have. Right. That's it. And it would be not trying to be sexist in anything. It would be Fromm and James. I think those are the 2 I would go with. Now, Karen Horney's great and deserves consideration for sure. I would put Bell Hooks in there, even though she wasn't a psychologist. I would put Bell Hooks in that group because I think she belongs. But out of pure psychologists, I'd go Fromm and James.
And that's exactly what's going through my head, which is it's so ironic. I was just thinking about James recently and Fromm. I'm like, what the fuck was wrong with me that I didn't do a dissertation on Fromm? I was in a perfect place to do it. I could have what was I hiding from?
He's the most vulnerable. It takes vulnerability to read him. You can't read anything without looking at yourself.
I did the same thing. I did Newton, who had his Principia was considered the most unreadable book in the Western tradition. That was safer for me than Fromm. And I think in some ways shows it fear in me, a lack in me. Maybe some growth now that I see that I look at all my Newton work, which was substantial, took years of my life, was just getting something out of the way so that I could go on to the next thing. I really didn't give a fuck about Newton then, and I don't now. He's not a very good man, and he's not a very good model of the way a human being should be.
But he's somebody you can use.
I can use.
To get
I can
where
appreciate.
You want to go.
But if he is the paragon of science, then I question science.
And then you get to Fromm, who's not a scientific. You get to James, who's not a scientific. They're more interpersonal. I remember reading, and even Maslow. Maslow identified Fromm as the true beginning of humanism in psychology. He said, I know I get that credit, but really leaning on Fromm's work quite a bit. So Erich Fromm really is the start of
See,
it.
what I see in Fromm, it's different. I think maybe why Maslow goes places and Fromm doesn't is that Fromm, as he goes increasingly, is critiquing the culture right in front of us. He's making that at the fore. If you're going to understand that human, you got to understand this fucking environment and their horrible attempts to adapt to this. You have to do that. You don't see that in Maslow or some of the others at that level.
Right.
Not even in
which is probably an abduction moment for him.
Yes.
That he, like, I can't leave this yet. I'm still here. I'm still here. I'm still here. I'm deeper here than I was. Every time it's a deepening. It's not, oh, well, kind of like you did with Newton. I use that, now I'm to the next thing. No, there's still room. The cave is still going.
Yeah.
And one of the things I love is Fromm wrote about his wife. And so his wife ran a clinic in which she treated people the most unscientifically way, right? Like, it's the most ascientific way you could treat somebody according to psychology, because she treated them with hugs. She would diagnose a number of hugs for them. Oh, this person needs 4 hugs a day. This person needs 6 hugs a day. And we need to be interpersonal with them. We need to.
But how scientific that is. I mean, let's go back to Maslow. Who did Maslow study with initially? It was Harlow.
Mm-hmm.
The biology of love. What do we find that primates need? Not just for psychological development, but for actual physical development. They need to be touched.
Right. Bowlby, Ainsworth. This is the same
thing. And she was going to be she was the one that was bouncing around in my head about the 2 most influential. It was Ainsworth. It was who I call the grandmother of attachment, not Bowlby. And again, she gets hidden under Bowlby. That's all.
Bowlby got Ainsworth going, right? But that was
actually Ainsworth.
But Ainsworth
who comes back and teaches Bowlby.
Yes.
And Bowlby is speculating, but it's Ainsworth that not only works up the protocol, but begins to ask the question, is this just this culture? And so she goes to Africa and begins to see that this is this. She's doing, and then comes back and teaches Bowlby. My understanding was Bowlby was trying to get her more credit, but no, it has to be the man.
Bowlby does seem like a good person.
Yeah, I think he meant one. I don't think he was that sexist, but he becomes
right.
And I critique this at press, so
because there was a lot of rules and people don't understand that, like, the person who created the idea of greenhouse gas, and right now I thought of that story, but I'm not thinking of her name, was a woman, but she was not able to read her paper on the floor of the scientific community that was considering whatever was going on. And so a male had to read it. So a male colleague read it, and then the next volume of the work that it was published in, an optometrist, if I'm not mistaken, read her previous paper, basically steals it, plagiarizes the hell out of it, and he is credited typically as the person who discovered greenhouse gas, but it is not her.
See, and you see this.
Now, I'm not a biologist or an environmentalist, so I don't know either of their names.
That same pattern with Kenneth and Mamie Clark. I think they were more conscious. If you really look at that, Mamie is the real genius and really is coming up, I think, even with the protocols, is involved with it. But they knew we can't fight gender and race. This is the battle. And so there was a deliberate move of Mamie behind Kenneth, even though Kenneth knows that she's the, and you get that credit there. And then where did they end up? You end up with Kenneth, first African-American head of the APA and first testifying in front of Congress. And that's at level. And where's Mamie? She's running a clinic.
Yeah. And wasn't Kenneth, was Kenneth also a student of James?
No, I don't know. To be honest.
I'm trying to remember. William James taught several people that became very prominent.
If you look at James's contributions,
and he taught minoritized people, he taught women, he was elevating them where other folks weren't.
He got Lillian Martin the job at Stanford in like the 1890s or something. It was so early, but Here's this woman he's worked with who's an absolute genius. But this is when women just can't even get into school, much less become professors. And to get published is hard for them. But what does he do? He's already known. He writes her a 3-page letter of recommendation, which is a work of art. Knowing she's a woman, they're going to look down on her. But he's basically he's a good writer. This woman's going to rock and roll. Mm-hmm. You give her a position. And she is one of the few that we see early on becomes a full professor at Stanford, is respected. Now, the stuff that she does, of course, we've forgotten, and other people have taken the credit for it. She invents gerontology, but she doesn't call it that. She doesn't want any bullshit. She said, we're old. Let's call it old people. We're old. We can't do things, but we can do other things. Mm-hmm. She was marvelous. She would not be where she was at if he wouldn't have done what he did.
No. That's what I think one of the geniuses of James, if I'm not mistaken, Mary Calkins was one of his students.
Yes. Like, it was
all
Calkins.
These people are coming through him.
I think it was Calkins. It was one of those early ones. I may have this wrong. But got permission to enroll in his general psychology, which is a graduate course. And there were 2 other males in there. And they said, if a woman's in here, she can't be in here. We're not going to be here. And he said, go away. And so it was one-on-one. I don't know if it was Calkins or another one of those really early women. But that was James. And
he really was. For me, James has to be one of the 2 for me, right? Because of that, because of so much coming through him. And for me, I just go with Fromm because I always go with Fromm. But he's the person who made the most sense to me. I think Ainsworth is a hell of a person to put in the contention there. I do. Because again, I think we undercut a lot of that attachment stuff. As we didn't, because essentially what does it mean? It means that if your kid's not exactly what you want them to, it's the parent's fault.
And she's doing an early form of what's called action research, which most people in psychology hate. I've dealt with this. But that's doing research with this idea of social justice and modifying the research as you go. So if there's a moment to intervene at the cost of objectivity, you do it. And she did it. When she saw what was happening, she began to intervene with the moms that were being avoidant and just saying, change your behavior, which invalidated the study at one level, but was the most beautiful thing. Because what happened? When they changed their behavior, the kids changed their behavior, and then you began to see that the parents felt more secure. The avoidance started to enjoy the children.
Which is a really bad thing for a researcher to do, but a wonderful thing for a therapist to do. This is the thing. Like, that's where...
I don't know if you ran into that on, with the IRB stuff, but I don't think anybody else in the psych department knew what action research was but me. And that was coming out of that training in the humanities, especially training in literacy, where you want to be objective, but you realize that if you allow illiteracy to continue, you're hurting the person. So yes. You intervene, you change.
If it's, you collect the data that you have, and then you offer, it's no different than, I think it's becoming a little bit more common now, but if you do like a genetic marker test for bio, and you see that someone may have a marker for precancer marker or something like that, do you tell them this or do you not? Are you obligated to inform them of that or not? Like, where does that fall ethically? And you have to have a good guideline of like why you're doing it or why you're not, or what you're going to do with that. Because it is information. That information is super important.
I think too often you're not like this. I'm not like this. But too often in psychology, I think this almost obsession, objectivity, results in an extreme coldness.
First of all,
as if they have to be, as if it's part of the narrative of being that experimental psychologist.
A professional researcher keeps everybody at arm's length which is exactly what made Freud say there can be no faith. There can't be religion. There can't be this. We have to be cold. We have to be this. We can't have interpersonal things. We can't have, it all has to be replicated. Well, the problem is, I'm a big believer in science and scientific methodology, and I think it's a beautiful thing. But the minute we say that it's the only thing that exists and it's the only thing going, it's not all objective.
And see,
and it's the subjective that matters. I was telling some students this. I was like, as a therapist, Sapolsky's book, I think I mentioned that before in another one, but I'll Behave is the book title. Science is a law of averages. So there's outliers already. And what do we do with the outlier? Well, if I'm a therapist and I have a modality that works 60% of the time for this issue that this person has, then I'm taking a good risk that there's a 40% likelihood that I can't help them.
That's true.
And I've never understood that. I don't get it. And Q. So where were we?
And thus, by way of summation, in conclusion,
so here's the real ending. Maybe the weird pause. Yeah, it was a bathroom break. It happens. We're human. Get over it. And so the real ending, to give you a legitimate and decent ending to this episode. Abduction, I think, maybe, is the grand culmination of the other three. If you remain open and childlike to the possibilities of what could or couldn't be, which, what I want to talk about next week, leaves love to be the greatest form of abduction.
That's interesting. And it almost, as you say this is going a new way. But you guys can go look this up. Aristotle's 4 causes, 4 different causes of anything out there. But they're not all equal. That it's that final cause, purpose, that subsumes the other 3 causes. So we have something similar going on. Mm-hmm. For Aristotle, it's in the end, it's the purpose of things.
Well, and to be truthful, abduction could be trying to work on people all along, but if your brain's not ready for it, you miss it.
That opens the door to a very interesting discussion on totemization, I think. But we should save for another day.
Because I think, that's kind of the thing. I remember favorite movie of all time, The Crow, with Brandon Lee. And came out and there was an interview, by the DVD, and there's an interview with him. And he dies on that movie, like in real life. He passed away. And in the interview, it says some of the most heartbreaking things, because he said, it's odd how we look at life as this infinite thing. When he goes, in all honesty, how many more times will you look up and see a full moon? We act as if it's infinite. We act as if there's endless. But really, is it only like 3 or 4 more times before we're dead?
Oh, yeah.
And he died very quick after that. Maybe he didn't even see another full moon after he says this. So, at my heart, I believe that's abduction. But we have to be open to it. We can't be so clouded with all this other shit. All of this objective truth and all of these things that we have to do for other people to keep this society thing going. And make ourselves free to explore the moment that's right in front of us. But we have to be willing to be vulnerable and do that. We have to be willing to say, I don't know enough, and this is my effort of knowing. I'll learn this abductive moment, and it'll teach me all of these things. And then I'll get to that point for real, and I'll stand there solidly and see the next one.
Oh, man.
That's where I'm at.
I'm with you. And that comes back, I think, again, this should take some time to unpack, to Walter Benjamin's concept of the messianic moment.
Yes.
I think he is talking about a material and spiritual moment that is abduction, but it's abduction at the grandest level. It's an abduction which is recognizing what we're gaining with the change, but it's also recognizing what we're losing.
Which in every relationship you are.
Yeah.
Even the relationship with yourself.
Oh, yes.
You're gaining and you're losing. And that takes me back to Alpert with the psychological death. You can't maintain who you were at 13
No.
and be 20. You can't maintain who you were at 20 at 30. And your body really wants to revolt against who you were at 30, at 40, right? Because your knees start hurting, your back starts hurting, everything goes out. And so you have to keep killing this earlier version to make room for the new. And so you lose some things to gain some things. You lose some things to gain some, and this is dance, right? And this is life. And so I think falling in love with another human being, whether it's romantic or not, I lose a bit of myself to gain the we.
The we.
Right? And you keep doing that. And it's a beautiful thing. And sometimes we hold on to it too long and we kind of choke it and make it die instead of understanding. And that's something, use what you know full well as a professor. You get out there and you get to meet somebody and you have a very close connection. Like, well, I'm going to know you the rest of my life. Probably you're not.
No.
Probably you're not. And that's okay because I know me the rest of mine. And I'm going to say thank you for the role that you've played. And we'll move on.
It's a professor. I didn't understand it, but he had told me, he taught for years. He goes, every year I fall in love with the students. And at the end of every year, my heart is broken. He said, every year. Listen to that. And it was important. I've been teaching for like 35 years. And now I get it. I've said that to younger teachers and they don't get it. Yeah. Is that sexual? I'm like, no, you're missing the point.
Are you dumb?
We're talking about love. We're talking about care. We're talking about concern.
Yeah.
And then this unique thing. It's going to be very brief. For
in
you,
it, when you're in it, it feels forever. And that's the beauty of time. It can be, that might be what they mean by like being in a moment of flow, right? When you're in flow, you and I sit here and talk and it feels like we've been talking for 5 minutes and it's been an hour and something. And that's the nature of it.
It's the nature of it.
Because it's time well spent. That's what it means, or to me at least, right? And that's abduction. Meeting you in the truest story ever, right? And I'll end on that story. It is an essence of love and understanding of camaraderie with another person. But I remember I was in the first floor of the education building, Indian graduate student looking for a mentor for a research project, all of those things. And I hear this obnoxiously loud cackle. This laugh that fills a room. And that room is 3 stories tall. And I looked over and I was like, who the fuck is that? And I see you. And you've got a fedora on. You've got a plaid shirt and this really shitty little leather vest. Yeah? And like, you people talk about seeing people's aura or whatever it may be. And that's the first time I think I ever saw a person's aura. And yours was like brown and orange from cigarettes and coffee. Mostly, I think. That's roughly what it was. And I went, who the fuck is that? I need to meet them. I knew it. I was like, I need to meet them. And it just so happened, serendipity again, we went to the same meeting. And they had us do the Q sort to find out what type of psychologist you were.
I remember that.
And you and I are the only 2 grouping as a humanist.
That's right. I remember
where we have, so we're Fromm and we're this, and like right there, And so afterwards I was like, okay, like I feel it. And so I blindly pitched you and asked you to be the chair of my thesis. And you were like, what's it about? And I went, it's about the perceived attraction in men and postmenopausal women. And you went, I love it. Let's do it. And that was it. That's what started it.
That's a cool
So
story.
long ago. And that's abduction. So people can abduct us because of a
Yes.
possibility that we sense with them. And we might call this, precognition. There's all kinds of names for it. I look at it, and what made the most sense to me always was abduction. And it's a creative, vulnerable space. And then once you enter it, it opens you to further creative, vulnerable spaces. And you keep growing, and you keep becoming this person that you are. You've done it with some of the nuns that you had in school. And so like when you look back, you can see how many times you've entered. I did it with an English teacher that I had who met me years later gardening as I was in high school, who meets me in not a hotel. Oh, that would have been weird. Who meets me in an airport and puts me back on path. If I wouldn't have been that student, that would have never happened. Right. And so that is that making room for the potential of abduction if you're open to it and you're paying attention. And I think, again, that's what Brandon Lee was talking about when he's talking about how many more moons are you going to see? Are you open for it? And that has always resonated. That is one of the reasons you and I are always easy company for each other, because we, as Heinlein would say, grok pretty strongly on that moment.
Yeah. And we clearly live outside of Western time.
Well, I think we do. Yeah. I really do. And I love that about, because we keep pace.
It's more than a joke. I've done this for years, that a student will see me in between class. It's important. I can feel it. We have 5 minutes. Well, I'll turn 10 minutes into 2 hours. So the student will only be late 5 minutes to their next class. What that teacher doesn't know is me and that student have just lived 2 hours and 10 minutes in between classes. I've always wondered, is it exhausting for the student as it is for me?
No. Well, it wasn't for me.
I don't know how else to do it.
It wasn't for me.
If they're not going to give us enough time, well, then fuck them. We're going to fuck with their time.
But that's the thing. Time is the gift. Right? Yeah. And you were giving it, and they were giving it. Because if they don't come to you, then you have no purpose, no meaning, no anything else. You need the receptacle to pour into. And then later they take that same full cup and they pour it into someone else. So on and so forth it goes. So yes, I think abduction is a perfect extension of creativity, and I think it's also maybe the perfect manifestation of creativity, as long as you're open and childlike with wonder. And hopefully we all retain that. But now I think next week we'll talk about love, and how love is the purest form of abduction. And we're not talking about sexy hookup time, although that is a part of love too. We're talking about real love, not the fake love. Right? So that's where I'm at this week. Thank you. This is a proper send-off, not a bathroom send-off.
Not a bathroom send-off.
And thank you once again for another week, another interaction. And, one of the things I want to do, I don't remember the name of it. So poets do this all the time. It has a name, but basically you offer a line, then I offer a line, and then someone else offers a line.
I've done this before. I don't know what it's called. I've sat in bars and poets, and my favorite way to do it is you only get to see the line that precedes your line.
Yes, and then only the other person collects all of it. And so I thought, what would be cool if people who watch want to participate is we start doing that type of poem at the end of every segment, and then we capture it and we collect those poems for.
That would be cool.
Yeah, that's super nerdy, but we won't do it today. But that's a thought.
That's a thought
that we would have. Maybe you could comment whether or not you'd be willing to participate, because it only works if you work. One of those kinds of things. But it could be fun to have these weird hodgepodgey poems at the end of this whole run, however long we do
I
it.
remember when I used to do that in bars, I would always throw something sexy in it, regardless of what the topic was, because it seemed to really provoke everyone around me.
Poetry goes really well with math and sex. I don't know why. Rhythm, maybe rhythm is what it is. Rhythm is a mathematical thing. So,
yeah.
But anyway, thank you all, and hope you enjoyed it. Any parting word?
Now live long. Well, Jesus, I shouldn't say that. Your life may suck.
That's
Prosper. Don't. If you're prospering, then live long. If you're not prospering, don't do that live long thing. Jesus Christ.
Or find a way to prosper, and then live long. Find a friend who's prospering and camp in their backyard for a very long time.
Stealing from the rich is always good. It's moral. I approve.
Love it. Thanks.